There's a million ways to make it look like something is floating.
Name one.
Repulsor lift, tractor beam, magnets, mirrors.
Hey, welcome back, ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and let's talk about Skeleton Crew Episode 3. So I want to tell you my thoughts on the episode and the show so far, but also, I think this show can really tell us something interesting about where Star Wars is right now. Like, all of these shows are going to culminate in telling a story that's about the fall of Thrawn and the rise of the First Order, which is exciting, and I think this show is going to play an important part of that story, which I'm going to explain later. And in just a bit, I'll be joined by Heather Antos and Pete Fletzer from the Around the Galaxy podcast, but first, let's talk about how this show feels like Star Wars without a Skywalker in sight. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of those Ewok TV movies from the 80s.
The Ewoks made movies?
Yeah, there were Ewok TV movies. I mean, all people ever seem to remember about them is that they were bad. But the thing is, in the 80s, we didn't think we were ever going to get any more Star Wars. So we were so excited to watch those movies when they came out. Like, this was our first live-action Star Wars since Return of the Jedi, and it didn't need movie stars to carry it.
Oh, so the movies were good?
No, not really, not at all. They were, however, of their time. But Skeleton Crew is good. You see, I think this show is giving us the best Star Wars mystery we've seen in like 10 years.
The Acolyte had a mystery. Lots of mysteries, in fact.
Yes, but the Acolyte solved the murder mystery in episode 1. The Chimera reveal was kind of obvious, and by the end, it was pretty easy to figure out what happened on that Force Witch planet all those years ago. Like, that show put mystery ahead of character. But with Skeleton Crew, I care about these kids. They actually talk like kids. So the mysteries of the show, who is Crimson Jack, what is At-Attin, these are mysteries that are important to the main characters, and that's an important distinction. Nobody is withholding information for narrative purposes. We're all discovering all of these new truths at the same time. Not to mention that we just don't know very much about the Old Republic. Like, that's the Republic that fell at the end of the Jedi and Sith War 1,000 years ago. So it's exciting to see these new ideas and new settings and new time periods in the galaxy finally get explored. And like Jude Law, can we trust this guy? Was he really a former Jedi Padawan who survived the Purge like Cal Kestis or Kanan Jarrus? Or is he just a Force-sensitive pirate? Not only are these interesting questions, but the answers are going to directly affect the well-being of these characters. And I keep bringing that up because action affecting character doesn't always happen in Star Wars, which I'll talk about in just a second. But also, I think that Skeleton Crew is part of an important trend that I'm noticing in Disney Star Wars. Like, I think I've worked out exactly why some projects, like Mandalorian Season 1 and 2, work so much better than some others, like the Book of Boba Fett and Ahsoka.
Hey guys, I'm just dreading the holidays this year.
Why?
Well, 'cause I gotta travel around so much for Christmas. Help! Help! And when you travel around that much, it's hard to get all the nutrients that my strong, masculine body needs.
Oh, I hear you, man. I travel so much during the holidays. That's why I always take some AG1 travel packs to fill in the gaps in my diet.
Why, whatever is AG1?
Well, AG1 is a daily dietary supplement, and they're the sponsor of this video. It has 75 different ingredients, and this is a research-backed daily health drink that combines a multivitamin, probiotic, and a blend of superfoods into just one scoop. You see, AG1 supports whole body health, your brain, your gut, and your immune system. It helps me focus, gives me energy, and it's great for workout recovery because of its high magnesium content. And I gotta tell you guys, I use AG1 all the time, usually in the mornings to start my day. It improves my mood, lowers my stress level, and it's also incredibly easy to use. You have 8 ounces of water, you add 1 scoop of AG1. I like to add in a drop of the vitamin D. All you have to do is shake, and it's just that easy. Now, because this is so easy, it becomes an essential part of my daily routine. No messy blenders, just powder, water, shake, and you're on your way to a healthier day. So we have a special deal for you guys. If you click my link or this QR code, AG1 is offering new subscribers a free $76 gift when you sign up. You'll get a welcome kit, a bottle of the vitamin D, and 5 free travel packs in your first box. So go to drinkag1.com/ScreenCrush or scan the QR code to get started. Thank you so much, AG1, for sponsoring this video.
Hey, I just got back from my trip. Help! Help! And I have full body health thanks to AG1.
Well, that's great, buddy.
You escaped this time, but not for long, I think.
So back to Skeleton Crew. I want to talk about what other Star Wars shows could learn from this one. You see, The Force Awakens started with a weird kind of reverse cliffhanger. It begins with the Empire completely reborn and the good guys once again being a rebellion, but it never explained why. How did this happen? Now, this was kind of frustrating as a moviegoer, but it gives other creators a huge opportunity to fill in those blanks. For instance, Chuck Wendig wrote a trilogy of novels called After Aftermath that explored the end of the Empire and the very beginning of the First Order. And other comics, novels, and games have also helped shade in the aftermath of the Galactic Civil War. And then, when J.J. Abrams brought back Palpatine with one sentence,
somehow Palpatine returned.
That's such nonsense. I would never say that.
well, that meant that then Star Wars had to explain how that happened. So, shows like The Mandalorian and The Bad Batch managed to tell their own stories about their own characters while also sprinkling in a little bit to contribute to that new, greater story. So in The Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2, we saw hints of the cloning chambers on Navarro, and we knew that the Empire wanted Grogu's blood. And in The Bad Batch, the Empire is looking for Omega specifically because she could help them clone the Emperor. But other shows, like The Book of Boba Fett, gave us some connections to the overall story, with like Luke and building the Jedi Temple, but that show also fell short on character. In my opinion, Ahsoka had way too much world building, but didn't really bother to flesh out what the protagonist of the show wanted or how she even felt. That show was so obsessed with world building that they didn't even bother telling the entire story. It was mostly set up for season 2.
Oh, God, is that still happening?
So I think this ratio should be about 80% character and story and 20% saga. And the Skeleton Crew so far is nailing that balance. We're primarily focused on the kids, and through their eyes, we're seeing this mystery of At-Attin. We see how dangerous the pirates are, and we're a little scared of Crimson Jack. Like we theorized in our Easter egg video, I think that At-Attin is going to end up being key in building toward the rise of the First Order, or the Sith Eternal Fleet. But this is like going to be a light touch connection. It does not need to affect the entire show. These kids don't need to be running around the galaxy trying to stop the First Order.
Let's start a skosh bit smaller.
Like, this season could literally end with one of the Sith cultists being revealed as this mysterious supervisor that they referenced in episode 3.
I have them sent by the supervisor.
This show so far is putting character first, and each kid is completely different from the others. Like, they represent the same kind of archetypes as the kids in the Goonies. The dreamer, the street smart kid, the tubby innocent kid, the tech kid. Hell, even 33 is like Sloth from the Goonies, a lumbering, overprotective brute that keeps them from getting murdered by criminals. But even though this formula is familiar, and even though the Star Wars galaxy is very lived in, I still have no idea what's going to happen next. And for a Star Wars fan, that is very rare.
I drink and I know things.
But now I'm joined here by group editor at IDW, Heather Antos, and also Pete Fletzer from the Around the Galaxy podcast. Pete, welcome to the show. It's your first time on the channel. We've been trying to make this happen for a long time. How does it feel to be on ScreenCrush?
You know, it's a lifelong dream come true, Ryan. I feel, but in all seriousness, one of my favorite channels, one of my favorite shows to watch is when you guys break things down. So it's a super big honor and pleasure to be here. Thanks.
And this episode almost broke me. All that Arabesh on the scroll.
I'm glad you look at that stuff and not me.
Well, part of it was backwards and upside down. And actually, you know what was harder was when I went to go edit that part of the Easter egg video, I tried to actually find all the parts that because like, it's not just it's like in different circles and it connects to different places because it's an incomplete scroll. It was a nightmare. But it did reveal some really interesting things that we talked about in our Easter egg video. Basically, the Senate commissioned this planet. It's from the Old Republic. They mentioned the Great Work several times, which, you know, leads into this great mystery of the show. So I just talked about like my thoughts on the show, the mystery, how much I like the mystery, and of course, how it connects to the Star Wars galaxy. And I want to hear from you guys on that and whether or not you think that this show should even bother connecting to the Star Wars galaxy. Pete, you know, since it's your first time here, let's start with you. What do you think of Skeleton Crew so far?
I have to say, I am loving every second of it. And I would say even this latest episode is the way I'm looking at it is sort of, it's my favorite Star Wars possibly since the Marshall episode of The Mandalorian. It just feels adventure-y, feels Star Wars-y, and it feels like it's captured what it needs to feel like Star Wars again.
Yeah, I would agree to that, and especially because it kind of like how The Mandalorian was very much like Spaceman with No Name, right? Mm-hmm. It was a genre set in Star Wars. And Heather, now we're getting a different genre we've never really seen in Star Wars, unless you count those Ewok movies I mentioned earlier, which I haven't really seen since I was a kid because I don't want to taint my very lovely memory of them. But for research, I might have to watch.
I just had to rewatch them actually for a different show. Sorry, Ryan.
Okay.
I just had to rewatch them, and I forgot the actor's name, but the diabetes commercial guy.
Wilford Brimley, yeah.
Yes.
That's right.
Him and them. Yeah. I was like, oh my gosh.
Those movies scared the hell out of me because her whole family dies. Mm-hmm. Like that little girl loses her family, and it's like
but she doesn't
really taps into some primal fear.
She doesn't mourn them at all. So like, don't worry about it.
She's got that Princess Leia. Hey, my planet just blew up, but that's cool. I got stuff to do.
Exactly.
I'm gonna go comfort this boy I just met who just lost this guy he just met instead of crying about my dead dad and dead mom. That's Leia, at least. Heather, what are you thinking about the show so far?
It's so fun. It's super, super fun. I love the kids so much, almost to the point that whenever Jude Law is with them, I'm like, I don't care about you. Get off the screen. I want more of the kids together.
And that's hard to do because, like I said earlier, the show is kind of like Stand By Me and the Goonies because the kids are archetypes, right? They are very much like members of the Justice League. They each have a superpower, a personality that's distinct. It's hard to do that and make the kid feel like a kid and not a character. But they manage it. These are real kids, Pete.
Yeah, it's funny because I didn't even think about it until after the episode was over that we didn't really see Jude Law at all in the first 2 episodes. And I didn't miss him. But when he came in, he elevated the kids as well. I mean, suddenly those 80s characters, and I think that was one of the great things about 80s movies, the good 80s movies, the Goonies, E.T.,
Mac and Me.
All of those, right. The kids were able to stand on their own or next to the adults and act. And next to Jude Law, I mean, when they come back to the ship, and not to get too far ahead, but when they come back to the ship and Fern literally pushes him and says, no, it just worked so well. You believed everything you were seeing there.
Heather, how are you feeling about the mystery of this guy? Like, do you have any theories about this? Do you think he's yet another Padawan who escaped the Purge like Cal Kestis and Kanan Jarrus, or is he going to be something different?
Silvo?
Silvo / Crimson Jack.
Well, whatever we gonna call him.
Yeah.
Right. Let's go down. Jude Law. I don't know. I kind of like. You're gonna hate me for this. I kind of don't care. Like he honestly is kind of
fine.
The least interesting part of the show to me. I'm so captivated in the kids. I'm so captivated in how they're coloring this world of piracy and Star Wars, which we've known about. The scoundrels and the piracy. Since the very, very beginning when we were at the first cantina on Tatooine, right? We've known about all of this, but we've never really got to spend a lot of time with them. And as well as, like you said, At-Attin and the mystery of all of that. Like, all of that is so much more interesting to me than, here's another hypothetical Force-sensitive, person that we have and have, seen mysterious Force powers or not before in Star Wars.
And that's interesting because Jude Law is ostensibly the selling point of this show.
I know.
What we should be excited for, the former Jedi.
And I just don't care.
But I think it's okay that you don't care. I think the whole point is, though, that he is this guy who is in their lives, right? They are the hobbits, and he is Aragorn, if you read the book. Now, the movies actually put more focus on Aragorn, but in the books, it's very much the Hobbit story where they happen to have these humans and elves and things around. Pete, what about you? Are you giving a flying crap about Jude Law's character right now?
A
flying Gundark, I should say. Wait, Gundarks don't fly. A flying Mynock about Jude Law's character right now.
I don't give. I'm going to start using that in everyday conversation, and people.
I already do.
Yeah. I do care, in that it's part of this whole mystery. And again, I think one of the things that you alluded to is that the lore is almost secondary to this story, right? So this is a kids get stuck on a pirate ship story, and there's a magician, right? And that's kind of it. Is he a Jedi? Is he not? I agree with Heather. It doesn't matter, but I do like that it adds that nice layer of questioning the trust, right? I mean, the relation. I'm loving the way KB kind of came to life in this episode and really started questioning who he was. And again, it didn't matter, but it mattered that it made the characters of the children do something different or take a different tack on the story.
I could also be in the minority here, but I'm past the point of thinking Jedi are interesting. Like, do you guys remember when Star Wars Galaxies came out? Like
yes.
the world. Okay, so when that came out, I was reading about it. I didn't even have a computer that would run it, but I was so excited about the idea of this game where you were in an open world Star Wars universe like World of Warcraft. And there was a thing in it where they were like, well, if you want to become a Jedi, you can, but it's like exceptionally difficult because they wanted, when a Jedi walked in the room, they wanted everybody to like freeze, right? And then, of course, all the hardcore gamers just all became Jedi and it overflooded Jedi in the population. But for me, that game should have been like the Star Wars Outlaws. I love the idea of just this universe where occasionally you will run across somebody using the Force and it should be weird and mystical and over there. Like I really liked, in Attack of the Clones, when Jedi walk into a bar, it's a big deal. Like, they're the marshals who are walking in.
Yeah.
So I don't want him overused. If he is Force sensitive, and I like that there's still a question mark there, I really hope that he's not just another Padawan who survived the Purge. I really hope he's a Force-sensitive pirate. Or maybe it's going to tie into Shin Hati and Baylan Skoll from Ahsoka, and we'll kind of see what that was. Maybe he was part of whatever they were doing. The point is, we don't know, and that is so rare in Star Wars. I watched the first episode of the Book of Boba Fett. I could tell you exactly how it was going to end. This, I have no idea. I presume the kids don't die, Heather. I would think that they'll make it. Maybe one or two of them might go. I don't feel good about Neil.
Oh no!
Yeah, I think those pirates are going to be cooking some elephant meat over a Spitfire.
No. If anyone, Neil is the one they'll want to keep around because that's the easiest one to continue in shows. Like face actors, you can't recast. That's harder.
That's true. The kids grow up. Yeah, but his species ages like Maz Kanata, right? Like he's
of
going to be
course.
very yeah. What do you guys got for me theory wise about At-Attin? I mean, I just talked about how I think I would be surprised if it didn't tie into the Sith Eternal and all that. But is it going to be something super simple, complicated? What do you got?
I don't know. I have a couple of ideas, none of which are really founded in anything other than like would be interesting. Is it some sort of like scientific planet where it's like another like Geonosis-y type thing where we'll tie into the cloning of it all that we see in the sequel trilogy, right? Is there some sort of secret operative thing going on here?
Who is the supervisor?
Well, that's the thing. Like this, the word "the supervisor." That's a very specific title. That's not like captain. That's not admiral. That's not It's not a title we've ever really heard before in Star Wars. But that also, because it's a secret planet, because it has they have all these different types of currencies that it seems that they have, and because it's almost like this, the imagery that we keep seeing is almost this like idyllic suburban. Upper middle class neighborhood. I'm like, is this some sort of secret society, almost like utopian experiment that's hidden? That again because it was like sanctioned as a like by the old Republic. Like there's right. Some interesting
that's in the scroll.
Things there.
That's what it says.
Right, exactly. Was this planet like a literally like experimental society? That we have seen historically happened before in the real world. People have catered off to try and do. Experimental societies. I don't know.
Pete, it reminds me of when Homer got a job working for Hank Scorpio.
Yes.
Like that's what this community reminds me of. It's very much like this universe, this like world that's self-contained. What about you? You got any theories for us right now?
Yeah, I'm a little more on the sinister side in that I kind of feel like perhaps this is the First Order. They're building the First Order right here, and we happen to be seeing. Now, of course, Star Wars doesn't tend to break its planets up into different types of pieces like the Earth, where you actually have different societies and different communities.
Right? No,
but I like to believe that, that it is what we're seeing is on this part of the First Order planet is. The paper pushers, the analysts, and the boring financial people, but they take that assessment to see who's going to become the warriors and the stormtroopers and the generals. And unfortunately, I feel like Wim may have pushed himself out of the boring side and may end up on the other side of the planet where he becomes a First Order soldier. The challenge with my theory there, and the only reason why I think I may be a little bit far off, is what does that mean for a happy ending for this show, right? If the kids return to the planet, to their families, they're only returning to Palpatine's First Order, which then, of course, also says, how long has Palpatine been planning this? And this goes back to High Republic days. So, but I do think that there's some sort of direct connection to building the First Order as we see it in the sequel trilogy, which kind of makes... I posted a hot take today on Twitter, what I felt was a hot take, and that is that since the Disney era of Star Wars, maybe the Star Wars saga, the Skywalker saga, did end with George Lucas, and now we are experiencing the Palpatine saga.
I like
because
that.
the entire story
Yeah.
now is trying to tie it all back together to the famous Poe Dameron line.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Well, and like I said, we talked a lot about that in our Easter egg video, and I talked about it earlier, how I think that's exciting. You know, you look at like one thing George Lucas really did was he placed gaps between the movies and the trilogies, whereas The Force Awakens ended on a literal cliffhanger, so there was no room for creators to play. So I am excited about that, and Heather, I want to get your opinion on that. I'll throw out my little pet theory here. I would think it would be really cool if this was like a Sith Eternal thing. Personally, I would be very surprised, like you said, about the happy ending, sad ending. I think the administrator is just a robot, or the supervisor is just a robot. Like this is a planet that has been cut off for years. They've been running on their own, and they have no idea about it. And so they choose to keep that. Is how I think it will actually end. Yep. But, Heather, I mean, look, when you look at Star Wars and connecting all of these dots together, it does seem like a really cool opportunity. Like this planet, I think, was essentially the Fort Knox of the Old Republic, and it makes sense that Palpatine, you know, in our Easter egg video we talked about it, where we had the Sith-Jedi war end 1,000 years ago, and then all of a sudden this planet's still there. It would make sense to me if the Sith destroyed all these other 8 planets, but they were like the Joker, you know, not this one, Bob, I kind of like it. And they kept that one for their own and then have been running it ever since. So they could fund their massive fleet of Star Destroyers that came out of nowhere. But you got to admit, for a creator perspective, do you think this is fun? Is this a good way for Star Wars to go, leaving all these gaps for creators? Or is it just frustrating to have the movies be so inconclusive?
Oh, no, it's the ideal. Like, it is the ideal to be able to, you know, expand the universe.
I know you're biased, but you know,
well, no,
because you've done a lot of universe expanding yourself.
Yeah, but no, it is interesting, and it allows for other opportunities, you know, to tell these stories of characters that, or worlds, or, you know, societies that, like, there just isn't time to focus on in all of the films. You know, like a prime example I always like to go back to is, you know, Kira from Solo. You know, we got what, maybe 20 minutes total of screen time with her in that movie, but Charles Soule did extraordinary work with her in the comics. You know, and things like that.
And Crimson Empire, if you guys want to read them, if you haven't already.
Yeah. So it allows for like really, really cool opportunities to experiment and fill in the gaps. And even as we've seen, right, the TV shows and the films and the games take from the other stories, and it's all a language that weaves in back and forth together. I don't know. I find it very interesting. I think it also allows adding these gaps opportunities for other films and TV shows down the line too, right?
I would add to that, Heather, and what they've done so well so far with the show through the first 3 episodes is create a story that lives on its own, and the lore is there for people who want the lore. And they've done a great job of also doing it without being like, hey, look at that guy. Remember that guy? You see that guy? It's there. It's happening. If this show runs its course properly, it should properly, like I'm anyone to judge. It should run its course so that you can get through all 8 episodes and get this great story of the kids and the pirate and getting home. But if you know, the 10-year-olds can take that story and be like, that was fun, I love that. But the nerds like us can start to make those connections, and when we read, you know, the next High Republic book or another novel or comic book or the next film, and we see a direct connection to something that happens in this story, it'll all start to fill in. And I think that's what will make this show unforgettable and as close to perfect as Disney has done so far.
Do you guys agree with what I said earlier about this balance that we need? Speaking of like the nerdy connections, where I thought The Mandalorian, you know, you mentioned the opener, the Gunslinger episode. Wait, did you say Gunslinger or the Marshal?
The Marshal.
So you mentioned the Marshal episode, right? Great connection to the Aftermath novels that I mentioned earlier. That for me is a perfect light touch. That's revisiting a loose thread. That's, you know, talking about the armor. It's bringing some things up from the other canon. Season 3 had a lot of kind of clunky departures. I still think the story on the whole of season 3 is pretty damn good, but it's just told weird and out of order, and in such a way that it felt like the greater story was imposing itself on this story. And I felt the same way about Ahsoka, where instead of getting this, like, she never met Thrawn. Why is she trying to find Thrawn? Thrawn isn't personal to her. We never got her personal story, but instead the greater story affected her path. Do you guys think that there's a balance here, like I talked about earlier? Obviously, I think we think that Skeleton Crew is achieving that balance so far. But then, Heather, what happens when those greater interests, when something becomes popular like the High Republic and then everybody wants a piece of it?
It really then is the responsibility of the show's creators, right, to focus on what is the goal of this story, right? And we've seen, I think the sequel trilogy is a prime example of where we can see some outer forces, and I don't mean corporation or anything like that, but just like outer trying to force a plot to happen rather than have an organic plot of what the characters would do or the paths that they would naturally take, right? And that's really the job of the creators to protect that integrity of the story. So yeah, it gets harder, right, when things become more popular and stuff like that, because now I think High Republic is a prime example. It was created specifically so the people in publishing could have characters in a world and a timeline where outer forces of, what's happening in the movies and the films and the games wouldn't block them from being able to tell the stories that they wanted to tell. And then it was very successful. And then the movies and the games and the TV shows wanted their hands on it. So suddenly the people who created these characters in this universe were being told, no, you can't do that with your creators in your universe.
It's almost like you get punished for doing a good job.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. Pete, what is the balance there? I mean, do you think the 80-20 ratio I lined up works, or do you think it's actually less than that? It should be more like 95-5 or 50-50?
I think you nailed it with the 80-20 on that, because I think I think if we were to really dig in and assess where the Star Wars that we've gotten from Disney Plus over the last couple of years has been challenged or faltered, is when it got so hung up on itself. Like Star Wars became about Star Wars versus about the story. And that, again, I think that's why, when you think about some of the online discussion, I'll put it that way, it became about why it doesn't match what I expect it to be or what you expect it to be, versus it should just be a story that can work on its own in this universe. And as I was saying before, if we can come back to this story in a couple of years and go, oh, that's right, that's where this thing happened, or, just sort of living in the back of our mind and, exposing us to something that we hadn't seen before, like the pirates and that whole side of the universe. Geez, I think that's why this will work. I mean, when Star Wars didn't take itself too seriously, when, Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back, A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back came out, there was no pressure. It was just telling the story that we all just wanted to be sucked into. That's why there was controversy from Return of the Jedi, right? It was people walked in with, it's the third movie, here's what I believe about the universe, and this is where those things happened. And again, seeing this story about kids hung up in a Star Wars adventure, I think one of the showrunners said it, it's a story about kids who get swept up into the Star Wars universe. Perfect. That's a great way to look at it. And I think that balance that you were talking about, the 80-20, making sure that we're not forcing the Force or lore or things that you need to know to enjoy the story into it, make it accessible to everybody.
Pete, I think you actually just distilled everything I was trying to say earlier perfectly. The sequel trilogy was about Star Wars. It was about all the characters who were the new protagonists were fans of the original trilogy. Even Kylo Ren was. Whereas the prequels weren't fans of Star Wars. The prequels were George Lucas's personal essay on his divorce. I'll take that one to my grave. But I think The Mandalorian, seasons 1 and 2, were very much, in Star Wars, but not about Star Wars. And I think in season 3, it became more about Star Wars as they pulled in more aspects of lore. Heather, would you agree with that, or am I being unfair?
I agree hands down. I mean, like, Mandalorian is just, I was going to say just a guy, but he was, for all intents and purposes, he was just a guy doing a job, right? And he gets wrapped up in this larger story that, if you did know about the Empire and Palpatine and like all that stuff, it does color a little bit about Grogu's storyline in it, but you don't need to know any of that. Right. And same thing with Andor, right? Andor's just a guy literally just a dude, and they did such a great job in that first episode of making him just some guy in this universe, caught up in all of these things. And if you know the greatest storyline, again, like it helps color it, and you don't need it. The structure and support and the fascinating story of the world is already there, and I think that's what made that first season of Mandalorian and that first season of Andor very successful with more casual viewers. You know, there were people who had never been a Star Wars fan, never gave it, you know, the light of day ever before, but they were really hooked into those shows because you didn't need to know anything.
Whereas I would say Ahsoka was the exact opposite.
Yes.
Ahsoka is a
100%.
show where Rebels season 5,
Right.
is the best way to put it. With this show, I said this about The Acolyte. I thought The Acolyte was a very important make or break show because if it would have done great and been renewed, it would have signaled the future of Star Wars. You know, in the same way that The Matrix meant every action movie had people wearing leather for 10 years. The Acolyte would have, you know, gotten creators some leeway to go do other things. And I think the same about Skeleton Crew. I really hope Skeleton Crew is successful. I know it's a slow start, but like I always use our views, Heather, we talked about this last week. I use our views as a metric for fan interest. I think that's fair. And the views are picking up. Like, people didn't watch the show on the first night, but they heard about it, good word of mouth. I hope the costs are lower than Acolyte, because I think that's ultimately what doomed it, but I overall am optimistic about the future. I do have to wrap it up there, but I want to plug, Pete, your podcast, Around the Galaxy, is great. I've been on there myself. I highly recommend wherever you get your podcast to give it a listen. Heather is a great follow on all of her social media handles. She is a must. On Star Wars, comics, all things nerdydom. You guys got to check them out. So we want to know what you guys think. Let us know down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, be sure to subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. And don't forget to click our link for AG1 down below. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.